The night Sloane Whitfield walked into the Harrington Grand with her head high and her hands steady. Nobody in that ballroom expected what was coming. Least of all her husband. She had known for 11 days. 11 days of sleeping on her side of the bed, of passing the coffee to him in the morning, of answering his texts with short clean replies. 11 days of building the wall brick by brick so that when the moment came she would not shake, she would not cry. She would simply be ready, and she was ready. The Harrington Architecture Awards were the biggest night of the year for anyone in the industry. Black ties, crystal chandeliers, champagne served in flutes so thin, they looked like they might dissolve in your hand. Sloane had attended 4 of them on her husband's arm. She knew the parking attendants by name. She knew which tables had the best sight lines to the stage. She knew exactly where Declan would be standing. She had bought the dress 3 years ago for a client dinner in Milan. Midnight blue simple. The kind of dress that doesn't ask for attention but gets it anyway. She wore the diamond earrings her mother had left her. She did not wear her wedding ring. That detail she knew would register before anything else. Declan Whitfield was 44 years old, 6'1" and widely considered one of the most talented residential architects on the East Coast. He had a way of walking into rooms like he'd designed them himself, like the proportions existed to flatter him. Sloane had loved that about him once, the confidence, the ease. She had married him 8 years ago in a small ceremony in Vermont, and for a long time she had believed, genuinely believed, that she was the luckiest woman she knew. She was 37 now. She ran a boutique commercial real estate firm, Whitfield & Cole, which she had built from a 2-person operation to a team of 11. Declan's firm had benefited from that, quietly in ways he never quite acknowledged. Her client network, her vendor relationships. The renovation loan she had co-signed 3 years ago so he could expand his studio space. She had done it without hesitation, because that was what you did when you were building a life with someone. What you didn't do, what Sloane had never anticipated, was find a folder of bank statements in the cloud drive they shared for household documents. She had been looking for their car insurance renewal. She'd found instead 4 months of wire transfers, $42,000 moved in increments to an account she didn't recognize, timed in a pattern that told a very specific story. Not gambling debts, not a bad investment. The money had been flowing toward a short-term lease on a Tribeca apartment. An apartment Declan's name was nowhere near. An apartment she would learn within 36 hours that belonged to a woman named Tatum. Sloane had sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. She hadn't cried, she'd made a list. Tatum Lord was 29, a junior associate at an interior design firm and, as Sloane would discover through a combination of LinkedIn, mutual professional contacts and one very telling Instagram account, someone who had been working adjacent to Declan's studio for almost a year. She was blonde in the specific way that seemed to require maintenance. She posted photos of herself at wine bars, at gallery openings, on weekend trips to the Hudson Valley. In one photo taken at what appeared to be a rooftop party, she was wearing a watch Sloane recognized. She had given that watch to Declan for their 6th anniversary, a Baume & Mercier brushed steel brown leather strap. She'd had the back engraved. She almost texted him that night, almost asked him to explain. Instead she closed the app, called her attorney in the morning, and started a new document on her personal laptop titled simply, Next Step. Her attorney was a woman named Patricia Ossie, who had a corner office in Midtown and a reputation for being what one profile had called methodically devastating in mediation. Sloane had done her research. Patricia had handled 3 cases in the past 2 years involving business asset disputes within marriage. Which was exactly what this was becoming. Because here was the thing Declan may not have fully considered. Sloane's company held the lease on the building where his expanded studio was located. She had negotiated that lease herself. It was in Whitfield & Cole's name, and the renovation loan, the $40,000 loan she had co-signed, had been approved based on her personal credit profile, because at the time his firm was carrying too much debt to qualify a loan. None of this was ammunition she wanted to use. She had built a life with this man. She had imagined growing old with him. But she had also spent 11 days reading bank statements, and she knew now that the money he had moved, her money, effectively, since the accounts were joint, had helped furnish a life he was building with someone else. Patricia had been very clear. Document everything before you say a word. So Sloane documented. And she waited. And she chose the Harrington Awards as the moment, not out of cruelty, but because she knew Declan would be there. She knew his firm was up for an award. And she needed to have the conversation in a place where neither of them could escalate. Where he would have to stay composed, where the public nature of the setting would function like a contract. She had not planned for Tatum to be there too. She saw them from across the lobby. Declan in his navy suit, the one she had helped him pick out for a client presentation 2 winters ago. Tatum in silver close to his side, her hand resting on his forearm with the easy familiarity of someone who had stopped being careful. They were talking to a man Sloane recognized as the head of a competing firm. Declan was laughing. Sloane stopped walking. Not because she was stunned. She had known, intellectually, that seeing them together would feel different from knowing they existed together. But she hadn't expected the laugh. She hadn't expected him to look so entirely unbothered, so thoroughly at home in a life that was running parallel to hers without her knowledge or consent. She took one breath. Then she kept walking. She went to the bar first, ordered sparkling water with lime, which she held with both hands because it gave her something to do. She did not look at him. She let the room settle around her, let herself be seen by two clients she recognized, by a contractor she had worked with for years, by the event coordinator who greeted her warmly and asked if she'd found her table. "I did, thank you," Sloane said. "Beautiful room this year." When she finally turned, Declan had already seen her. The laugh was gone. She watched him process it in real time. The dress, the earrings, the absence of the ring, the fact that she was here at all. She could see him calculating. She could see him trying to decide whether this was a coincidence or something else entirely. She crossed the room slowly, not toward him, toward the table 2 over from his, where she had confirmed, 3 days ago, that her own seat was waiting. She was here as a guest of one of the presenting sponsors. One of her clients. She had arranged it quietly through a channel Declan had no reason to monitor. She sat down. She smiled at the people around her. She did not acknowledge him until he came to her. He came within 12 minutes. She had expected 10, so she gave herself a small, private point for knowing him well. Sloane. His voice was low, controlled. He had composure, she would give him that. "I didn't know you were coming tonight. I was invited," she said simply, and turned back to the conversation at her table. He stood there a beat too long. She felt Tatum somewhere behind him, positioned at a careful distance, watching. "Can we?" He paused. "Can we find a moment to talk? Before the program starts?" She looked at him then, fully, the way she had practiced in the mirror that morning, not cold, not angry, just clear. The look of someone who has already made her decisions. "My attorney has been in contact with yours," she said. "I think anything that needs to be said should probably go through them." He blinked. "You're Sloane. I don't have an attorney." "You will," she said pleasantly, and looked away. The awards program started at 7:30. Sloane sat through the first hour with the kind of practiced attention she brought to long client presentations. She ate the salmon. She laughed at the right moments. She spoke to the woman beside her about a mixed-use development in Brooklyn that they had both been watching. She was by every observable measure, absolutely fine. Declan's firm was nominated in the residential innovation category. She had known this for weeks. He had mentioned it at dinner back in March, proud, a little smug. She had congratulated him then and meant it, because at the time she still thought they were on the same side. When his name was announced as a finalist, she watched his table respond. The colleagues leaning in, the brief collective excitement. Tatum reached over and put her hand over his. The gesture was small. Probably no one else in the room registered it. But 2 of the people at Sloane's table glanced over, and then glanced at her, and she understood that the geometry of the situation was becoming visible. She didn't react. She simply continued her conversation, because she was not here to cause a scene. She was here to be seen. There was a difference. His firm didn't win. The award went to a studio out of Philadelphia. Sloane watched Declan absorb it, the slight reset of his jaw, the recovery smile, and felt something she hadn't expected. Not satisfaction exactly, but a kind of sad clarity. She had loved this man. She had believed in his work, and he had taken that belief and used it as cover. At the end of the evening, as the room began to move toward the exit, he found her again. Tatum was no longer beside him. "Sloane." He stepped close, voice dropping. I know this looks bad. You wired $42,000 from our joint account to pay rent on an apartment for another woman," she said, quietly, neutrally, the way Patricia had coached her. "Facts, not feelings, not in public. That's not how something looks. That's what something is." He opened his mouth. "The studio lease," she continued, "is held by my company. I'm going to need you to be out by the end of the quarter, unless you'd like to start paying market rate, which I can have drafted up this week." She watched his expression shift. "The renovation loan was co-signed with my credit. I'll be assuming that debt in the settlement and deducting the value from what we divide. Patricia has the full accounting. You're being—" He stopped himself, started again. "You planned this." "I prepared," she said. "There's a difference." Someone passed between them, greeting Sloane by name, stopping briefly for pleasantries. She turned to respond, warm and present, as if the man standing 2 feet away was simply another guest at the same party. Which, for all practical purposes, he now was. When the person moved on, Declan was still there, but something in his posture had changed. The easy authority he carried everywhere, that sense of being the one who shaped the rooms he walked into, was not quite as settled as it had been an hour ago. "I loved you," he said, And she believed him actually. That was the part that had kept her awake in the first days, the understanding that it was possible for both things to be true, that he had loved her and that he had done this anyway. I know, she said. I also know you used my credit, my professional network and my building to fund a separate life. So. She reached for her coat, which she had draped over the back of her chair. I think we're past the part where feelings are the relevant factor. She left before he could respond. Not dramatically, she said goodbye to the people at her table, thanked the event coordinator, collected her parking ticket and walked out through the front doors into the cold spring air. She did not cry in the elevator. She did not cry in the car. She sat in the parking structure for 4 minutes with her hands in her lap and then she drove home. The legal process took 7 months. Patricia had warned her it would take 8 to 10, so 7 felt like a minor victory. Declan did hire an attorney, a man named Bryce who called himself a collaborative divorce specialist, which Patricia translated as, he knows this is going to settle, and he'd rather not spend his client's money going to court. That at least was useful. The first real negotiation happened 6 weeks after the Harrington Awards. Sloane sat across from Declan at a conference table in Patricia's office, her hands folded, her face neutral. She had prepared for this the way she prepared for difficult client meetings. She knew every number, every line item, every document in the folder. Declan's attorney opened at 60% for Declan, which Patricia had predicted almost exactly. Sloane didn't react. Patricia outlined Whitfield and Cole's position. The studio lease, the renovation loan, the wire transfers constituting misuse of marital assets. She laid the proposed offset. She proposed 30% for Declan. That's not reasonable, Bryce said. It's well documented, Patricia replied. They went back and forth for 2 hours. By the end, Declan's attorney had come down to 40%. Patricia looked at Sloane. Sloane considered it. She thought about what she had co-signed. She thought about the watch. 35, she said. It was the first time she had spoken in the meeting. Everyone looked at her. Final, she added. There was a pause. Bryce leaned over to between them. Agreed, Bryce said. There was one detail Sloane hadn't figured out in those early 11 days. One thread she hadn't been able to trace. Whoever had shared the cloud folder, whoever had added those bank statements to a shared drive she actually accessed, it hadn't been Declan. He was meticulous about keeping his financial accounts separate, out of habit he'd always said, from years of running his own firm. The joint household account was the only one she had full visibility into. The statements she'd found had been scanned and uploaded to the shared folder. By someone who knew she'd look there. She spent 3 weeks trying to figure it out, quietly, without asking anyone who might tip off Declan. She went through the list of people who might have known. Colleagues of his, building staff at the studio. Anyone with access to the financial records of his firm. She had almost let it go when she got a coffee invitation from a woman she barely knew. Greta Huang, an associate architect who had worked at Declan's firm for 2 years before leaving last fall. She had reached out through LinkedIn with a message so brief it barely registered. Congratulations on the award season. If you ever have a moment, I'd love to catch up. They met at a cafe in the West Village. Greta was quiet, careful with her words, clearly someone who had thought about this meeting before attending it. I don't want anything from this, she said, before Sloane could ask. I just thought you should know that you weren't the only one he did something like this to. Sloane held her coffee cup and said nothing, which she had learned was often the most useful thing you could do. Greta had been offered a promotion at the firm, 18 months ago, contingent on a project assignment. The project had gone to someone else. Someone who, as far as Greta could tell, had gotten it through a conversation that didn't happen in any meeting room. When she'd raised it with Declan directly, the conversation had been friendly and entirely unproductive. When she'd started to look more carefully at the firm's project billing, she had some access for billing coordination purposes. She'd started noticing patterns. I didn't know what to do with it, Greta said. I wasn't sure it was my place. But when I left the firm, I took a copy of what I'd found. And when I heard his firm was up for the Harrington Award and you were still, she paused, I thought you might want to see it. Sloane thought about the folder, the careful, anonymous act of placing information exactly where it would be found. Thank you, she said. Greta nodded. You seemed like someone who would know what to do with it. She had been right about that. Whitfield and Cole took on 2 new clients in the month the divorce was finalized. Sloane hired a 4th broker. She moved the firm's offices to a larger space on the 14th floor of a building she had been watching for 2 years, waiting for the right terms. She didn't speak publicly about the divorce. She didn't need to. The professional world in which they both operated was not large, and people generally understood the shape of things without being told. The studio quietly vacated the building Whitfield and Cole controlled. The renovation loan was settled. The accounting was closed. She had dinner with her sister on a Tuesday in October, a week after the final paperwork was signed. Her sister had been careful throughout all of it, asking without prying, present without performing. She was the person Sloane had called first, back in those 11 days, because she was the only person who could be trusted to be angry on Sloane's behalf without it turning into chaos. "How do you feel?" her sister asked. "Tired," Sloane said honestly, "and clear. Those can coexist." "They can," she agreed. She had a glass of wine. She talked about the new office space. She talked about a long weekend she was thinking of taking in late November, somewhere with no industry events, no networking opportunities, no one who knew her professionally. Just a quiet place to exist without performing competence for a while. "You should go," her sister said. "I think I will." Outside, the city was doing what it always did, loud, indifferent, continuous. Sloane had lived in New York for 15 years. She had built her career here, her professional identity, her reputation. She had also, for 8 years, organized a significant portion of her life around a man who had been keeping another version of that life running concurrently. She thought about Greta Huang in the cafe, saying you seemed like someone who would know what to do with it. She thought about the Harrington Grand and the midnight blue dress, and the look on Declan's face when he saw that she was not falling apart. She thought about the days she had opened the cloud folder looking for a car insurance form and had found instead the exact shape of the betrayal. She had made a list. She had executed the list, and now on the other side of it, she found that she was still exactly who she had been before. Maybe slightly sharper, maybe slightly less inclined to co-sign things she hadn't fully examined, but still herself. That, she thought, was probably the part that would have surprised him most. That after all of it she had come through cleanly without becoming someone she didn't recognize. The wine was good. The restaurant was warm. Her sister was telling a story that made Sloane laugh, an actual laugh, unplanned, the kind that you can't produce on purpose. It turned out that was still possible too.